I think the whole thing ranks as the sort of amateurishness that you really wouldn't expect to be happening at the top level of the security establishment of a country like the United States. Immensely powerful and important country.
Let's start, though, with that leak. And Donald Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, it's thought might be at risk of being fired after that extraordinary leak of top secret war plans to a journalist. He is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, who was added to a chat called Houthi PC Small Group, PC Small Group, which included some very significant figures in the Trump administration, including the Vice President J.D. Vance, Mike Waltz, and the Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. Questions are now inevitably being asked about whether the UK should really think hard about its intelligence sharing with the authorities in Washington. So Larissa Brown is defence editor at The Times, and we also hope to be talking in a couple of minutes' time to Christopher Steele, former head of the Russia desk for MI6. Larissa Brown, first of all, let's just deal with the intelligence sharing. Things have really changed since the Trump administration took over. How does the UK feel about the information it shares now with America?
Well, I think just before Trump actually was sworn in, there was some nervousness among the security community because they'd sort of been, they were tipped off about who might get to replace key positions in various security agencies in America. And I think since then it's got sort of from bad to worse with a series of events that will have extremely worried a lot of people in Britain's security agencies. And it's been something that I've been asking people about regularly over the last few weeks, especially with regards to that American decision to cut off intelligence sharing with Kyiv. Now, this latest blunder is obviously quite astonishing. And I spoke to a senior military source earlier who was saying that although it wouldn't have any operational impact, the fact that they're using Signal to discuss this highly sensitive information is kind of really shocking. And also the fact that they managed to then inadvertently add a journalist to it, just even more staggering. So I think everyone's going to be pretty surprised by this latest incident.
Right. We probably need to make clear, is it true that British forces were involved in these strikes?
They weren't involved in the direct strikes on the Houthi targets in Yemen, but what they were doing is helping out generally in the mission. So an RAF aircraft, a Voyager air-to-air refueling aircraft, was providing assistance to American warplanes that were flying around the carrier to basically protect the carrier in case there were any retaliatory strikes. It's quite interesting because the UK Ministry of Defence hasn't said anything official about this, but defence sources have told me that was the case, although there was no statement put out on it generally. So we were involved. There's nothing though to suggest that in that Signal chat that there was anything on British personnel. Luke Pollard, the Armed Forces Minister, was speaking this morning at the Defence Select Committee, and he was asked, was there any concern about the safety of British personnel? And he was, said that there wasn't at all, and that the sharing of information was continuing as normal.
But that British involvement, it makes it even more infuriating that the US Defence Secretary described the Europeans as, quotes, pathetic. I mean, it's quite hard to stomach.
It is probably not that surprising given the previous comments we've heard from people like J.D. Vance and Hegseth. But I think the point that they were kind of making is that the sort of crucial waterways that we rely on for all of our goods to Britain isn't necessarily as important to the Americans. Why should they be hitting the Houthi targets to protect those shipping lanes in the Red Sea? But actually, someone told me from the MOD that there wasn't any request by Britain or the Europeans for the Americans to hit those targets on that day. It was merely that there was an opportunity presented and the Americans decided to go for it.
Right, okay. But when you say an opportunity presented, was it weather conditions, something as practical as that?
I presume that they must have, I mean, they didn't say, but it will be something like, they would have got precise intelligence on some specific targets and they had a window where they could hit those. Is my guess.
Okay, Larissa, in the last couple of minutes, there's been some breaking news from the talks between Ukraine and Russia. We understand that a deal on safe navigation for ships in the Black Sea has been reached. The US pledging to help restore Russia's access to global markets for agricultural and fertilizer exports. The US also says it's agreed it will stay committed. Not quite sure what that means, but presumably committed to achieving a lasting peace is what that final phrase means. So I suppose that's something.
Yeah, we've got one positive development. I mean, both sides had wanted something to do with, enabling them to be able to ship grain from their territory safely without, coming under attack. So that will be welcome to many people. But obviously, there's a long way to go before there's any end in sight to this war.
Yeah, I mean, we need to make clear this is, as you say, a relatively insignificant development. I mean, you're right, it's worth acknowledging, but it doesn't mean we're anywhere close to the fighting ending. Larissa, thank you very much for that. Let's bring in Christopher Steele, former head of the MI6 Russia desk. Christopher Steele, first of all, that leak and the use of signal generally, what do you make of it?
Yeah, hi, Jane. I think it's very surprising that the principals in the national security establishment in America would be using a commercially available system to communicate battle plans about a forthcoming attack on the Houthis. The other thing is that you do wonder to what extent this is just the tip of the iceberg. Is this the MO, the modus operandi of these people? I've argued many times that they are amateurish and they are not experienced in the national security space. And I think this rather proves the point.
Yes, but this group included the Vice President, Trump's Chief of Staff and the Defence Secretary. If they don't understand the severity of what they're discussing, I mean, what hope is there?
It's a systematic failure. I mean, the Americans traditionally have been very hot on communication security within the leadership. And it's deeply worrying that this has emerged so quickly after the change of administration. I don't think we'd ever have heard anything like this in a previous administration. And you do wonder, as I say, whether this is the tip of the iceberg and what else they've been discussing in small signal groups and so on. The other thing that's particularly worrying in this case is the vulnerability of signal partly depends on where you are when you're using it. And it appears that Steve Witkoff, the US-Russia envoy, was in Moscow at the time when this was going on and when he was participating. So I think we have to assume that the Russians will have got into this this signal group and the conversation that was going on in real time, which is, as I say, shocking.
OK, are there any of these apps that are suitable for this kind of communication? I mean, lots of WhatsApp, which is owned by Meta, it offers you end-to-end encryption, doesn't it? Presumably so does Signal. Would you use any of them?
Well, working in the commercial world, of course, we have to use them. But as I've said before, you always assume that, particularly if you're somewhere that's potentially vulnerable to intercept, like Russia or China or anywhere like that, then you would have to assume that your calls were being intercepted and your messages were being read. So the answer, if I was in government, I certainly wouldn't use them. And in fact, again, the content, even the location, frankly, of where principals are in the US security establishment at any one time is really sensitive, and it should never appear on a commercial app.
Yeah. You have to wonder what they're thinking in Beijing. I mean, they must be having a chuckle or two.
Well, a chuckle or two, I'm not sure, because I think they would have quite liked these sort of practices to go on longer term and not actually be discovered and revealed, because it's an extremely valuable intelligence feed, potentially for both China and Russia, two countries which are very capable of breaking into signal, particularly, as I say, if any of the people using it are actually on their soil at the time, which seems to have been the case.
Well, that's really interesting. So the journalist, in your view, did the right thing in that he's written about it. He also was added to the group. It wasn't something he wanted. He then left the group and then he wrote about it. Has he done the right thing?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in fact, he's a sort of whistleblower by default. And I think he was right not to reveal the national security classified secrets, the military elements to this conversation, which he obviously was privy to. He seems to have been included in the group because his initials were the same as an official in the Trump administration, which is even more crass. And you really do have to wonder at how these things are being run there and what the implications are for, as I say, any material, any intelligence that's shared with America at the moment by Britain and other allies.
Yes, I mean, it is an incredibly clumsy move. So his initials JG, I mean, it's a wonder I wasn't added to the group chat, to be honest.
Your turn next.
Yeah, it will be my turn next. It really was as simple as that, a sort of cack-handed move to involve someone who had nothing to do with the whole thing.
Yes, and it went on for some time. I mean, nobody questioned the fact that JG made no contribution to the conversation,
And then left.
And then disappeared, and they didn't even ask why he had disappeared. So I think the whole thing ranks of the sort of amateurishness that you really wouldn't expect to be happening at the top level of the security establishment of a country like the United States, an immensely powerful and important country, and our closest ally.
Yeah. What do you think is likely to happen? Is Mike Waltz's role in real jeopardy here, or will Donald Trump do what he normally does, which I understand is that he likes to ride these things out? He's a complete stranger to shame himself, and he sort of applies the same technique or the same judgment to his nearest and dearest in terms of his administration.
Yes, either ignore it or to try and blame it on someone further down the food chain, which I think is what he's actually doing as we speak. It's clearly not credible, given the fact that all of these principals, including the heads of the CIA and the Defense Department, were engaged in a personal capacity on this group. So I think it's highly unlikely that there will be accountability. One of the big problems in America at the moment is the so-called trifecta, where the Republicans control both houses of Congress as well as the White House. It means that the heads of the committee and those setting the agenda for the committees are ignoring all this and are not prepared to investigate it, let alone do what they probably should do in this case, which is actually make criminal references to the referrals to the Department of Justice, which normally would happen in a situation like this.
And just a quick word from you, if you don't mind, on the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is talking to top White House officials right now. One American Democrat senator has said the US is starting to act like our adversaries, voting in the UN with Russia, Belarus and North Korea. It's a rogues gallery, if ever I've heard of one. What do you say to that?
I think he's right. I mean, I think that what we're seeing unfold at the moment is a realignment of the United States in the world, certainly under Donald Trump, which is to ally himself and to support the interests of other strong men around the globe, people he thinks he can do business with. And it's interesting, the comments about the Black Sea. Of course, it was the Russians who reneged on earlier Black Sea agreements that allowed for grain exports and the like during the war. And so every step that Steve Witkoff, the Russia envoy, and Trump himself and others seem to be taking at the moment seems to be supporting Russia's interests and Russia's position. And it's deeply worrying and unprecedented, I would argue. And it's time that we woke up to what was going on.
Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate it. That's Christopher Steele, former head of the Russia desk at MI6.